Shantz, CEO and founder of Solvent Direct. On January 29th, we're putting together a compliance summit in Oklahoma City to address some of the questions, comments, concerns we're getting about the new LP Gas Administration Class 6 permit. On August 27th of 2021, the LP Gas Administration, under the authority of the Attorney General's office in Oklahoma, issued a new permit requirement for the use of unodorized gases. Until August 27th, the OMMA and OBN were issuing extraction licenses without enforcing any national or state fire requirements for this particular application of LP gas. So we're getting a lot of calls from operators in Oklahoma that are confused. They thought they were fully compliant under OMMA and OBN requirements, and now they're finding out that there is a new requirement that they need to meet, specifically NFPA 54, 58, 70, Class 1 Div 1 enclosures, peer reviews on equipment and enclosures. Our goal is to be of service to the industry and bring together a group of operators, compliance, engineers, lawyers. On January 29th, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about what the Class 6 permit requirement is, what do operators need to do to get compliant as quickly and safely as possible, and get back to successful extractions. I hope to see everybody there, and I appreciate the opportunity to continue to be of service to the industry.
Hey everybody, welcome to Solvent Direct's Class 6 Compliance Summit. I'm Jason Showard. I host the Modern Extractor podcast, and I'll be moderating the discussion today. We're basically here today to discuss LPG extraction, safety, and compliance in Oklahoma. I'd like to thank Lexus Shantz and Solvent Direct for putting this thing together. It's important to have events like this and conversations like this to keep things moving forward and keep everything safe. Thank you all for tuning in from afar. Thank you for putting this together, and thank all of the extractors from Oklahoma and industry insiders that made it to this invite-only event. So make some noise, Oklahoma. All right, so as far as what's next, let's meet the panel. We've got Lexus Shantz, founder and CEO of Solvent Direct, Alex Barsky, founder of C1D1 Labs, Rachel Klubek with Loud Legal and Consulting, Austin Feeling, CEO of Zonja Extracts, and David Scholes, founder of Orem Solutions. Well, thanks for coming up here and being in front of a big audience and answering all the questions, guys. Just to start things off, I'd like to talk about the state of what's going on in Oklahoma right now.
And we understand there's a lot of miscommunication or no communication between the agencies, between OMMA being under the Department of Health, OB&DD being a separate entity that they kind of intersect but don't. There's a lot of regulations that are all over the place that people may or may not know where to look. And the problem is because OMMA has been amending these laws every 3 months since it's been an agency in Oklahoma, that there's so many changes and they're not accounting for every industry, because it is agriculture when it comes to growing, but it is manufacturing and safety and compliance in a lot of different aspects when it comes to extraction. So there's a lot of miscommunication. We hope some of this can clarify it for you guys.
So one of the first things I think would be good to establish is what is a Type 6 permit. So can you elaborate on what that is? Yeah,
Type 6 permit, it allows the holder to obtain, use, and store LP gas in their facility.
Specifically non-odorized.
Specifically unodorized, yes.
And it's new. I mean, the Class 6 was August 26th or 28th or something that they actually established the Class 6 requirement that until then hadn't really existed.
So now, inside of the Class 6 permit, there is a lot of references to the NFPA. I know, Alex, you wanted to touch on that and break that down for us.
Sure. So NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, they're really the guys that are writing, and girls that are writing the standards and codes that these buildings are going to be designed to, in addition to International Fire Code and International Building Code. NFPA 1, Chapter 38 is a recent addition to NFPA, and it's specifically around cannabis and plant processing. So a lot of the new terminology, like extraction rooms, rather than just a C1D1 room, because in addition to electrical, you have mechanical and a few other things that are specific to our industry. This new chapter has really developed a guideline standard for building these manufacturing facilities, in addition to NFPA 58, NFPA 72, NFPA 30, which define LPG flammable liquids, in addition to some of the standards that are used to transport, store, and/or use LPGs and/or flammable liquids.
So within a lot of those various chapters that you spoke of, it mentions a C1D1 environment, which is the part that I think a lot of the folks in Oklahoma are running into of not having after they're granted licenses to operate without it. So now, if they're getting shut down, what is the best path forward? Let's start off with what is a C1D1 environment?
Class 1, Division 1. So the idea of these rooms is that you're removing any sort of source of ignition, right? So all of the different electronics are sealed to be intrinsically safe, so that there's no chance of providing that spark, which would then ignite your fumes. The extraction room is more of a terminology that I like to use over C1D1. Not that I don't love the terminology, because my company has the name C1D on it. But in addition to the electrical classifications, you have mechanical requirements, right? These mechanical requirements are airflow, linear air velocity, 100 LFM capture velocity at your exhaust points. In addition to purge requirements that are attached to the gas sensor, so at 10 or 25% LEL, you either have visual or audio alarms that come off, and LEL is lower explosive limit, right? And these are your NFPA 72 requirements. And these gas sensors are going to be able to sniff butane in the room, which is nice if it's unodorized, before it reaches an explosive limit. The lower explosive limit is the amount of butane or propane in the air that would be the lowest point of an explosion. There's lower and upper. Upper explosive limit is when it gets too concentrated, right? There's too much butane in the air there's not enough oxygen for an explosion, right? That gas sensor is going to be able to determine this before you do, obviously, and it can remove that air with a purge system, which is all mechanical, right? So this is all specific to an extraction room, not necessarily just Class 1, Division 1. So it's important to know that these NFPA 1, Chapter 38, which is again a new code section, is written to have these new terminologies and new code requirements that aren't specifically just predetermined classifications from other industries.
So what styles of extraction would use specifically a C1D1, and then there's a C1D2? Like what extraction methods would use the various classifications of rooms?
So typically, Class 1 Division 1 is going to be your LPGs, your butane and propane, in addition to things like pentane. And then they have another one, Class 1 Division 2, which is used for flammable liquids, heptane or ethanol. I build all my rooms Class 1 Division 1. I tell people all the time that the UL certification for hazardous stuff is always going to be expensive. The little bit more money you pay to go from D2 to D1 is always % worth it, because you're likely going to end up changing your solvents in the very near future. And having that availability to do that to all different sorts of activities and standard operating procedures in your booth is important. There's going to be some different things and different styles of rooms, but typically if you can build your extraction room to Class 1 Division 1 butane propane standards, I do it every time.
We actually, I don't mean to interrupt, but we toured these guys. Yeah, we toured Zonda the other day, and you've got both. What do you have over there?
Well, so you get brought down to your lowest classification. So we run one at one time and one at another. But what it is we have our butane that's in the same room of our ethanol. But when you have your ethanol equipment, the things that are on that, the electrical on it, will actually bring that down to that Class 1 D2 level of it. So we only run one at a time there, and then shut down all those machines, and then we bring our classification back up, and then we'll be able to run that machine.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you're okay.
We could do a partition, which is coming up soon, for it to be able to have it partitioned off, and that way it keeps it in its own division there.
So then you have C1D1 and C1D2 under one roof.
Correct.
Yeah.
That would be able to happen then. But Alex is someone who could be the one to design that for you.
Right.
Right, and to be fair, the biggest mistake that people make is trying to design their own systems. There's one person in the room here that I know can do it. But there's a long time period that's expensive with teaching these engineers these new standards that are just now written, right? So you're paying someone who costs a lot per hour to now learn and read and research. But you have to have a third-party engineer review your equipment as well, right? So you're now paying an engineer to learn how to do the designs. And then an expert in the industry is then ripping up your engineer's designs and making you go through revisions just to meet the certification standards of the third-party engineer. Because he or she is the one putting their name on that stamp, right? And that's ultimately the removal of liability. It's my experience that a $40,000 10 by 10 room by C1D1 Labs that's pre-engineered with these stamps saves you $10,000 in just design engineering and certifications, right? Which is a fourth of the budget, and we already have it, ready to manufacture in 4 to 6 weeks. Which, as you have entrepreneurs like these guys and girls, we all know that when you make it to market, you make money. And when you're sitting there playing with plans and going back and forth with the city, convincing them that your engineer, Joe Schmo, who's never built an extraction room before, has the proper certifications and background, it's just not really worth it. So, getting a pre-engineered solution with these C1D1 is important. Understanding that you have to do architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing in order to get your permits is important. These are mechanical and electrical drawings that the building department reviews in order to get the permits for you to build, right? So it does a couple different things. It explains how your ducting and electrical distribution to your equipment is going to be done, and that removes liability away from the city and yourself. So if there is a fire, right, and even though your fire marshal, your city may not be requesting this, if you don't have mechanical engineers that are stamped or electrical engineers that designs that are stamped, there's a very high chance that if there's a fire, your insurance is going to call you down, or your employees may sue you because you haven't done the due diligence to get an engineer to take liability away, or at least show that it's done correctly.
Shift it. At least shift liability.
Yeah.
Well, and I met with the LP Gas Board this past week, and they were explaining that there's been a couple of fires recently here, and one of them, they had liability insurance checked because they didn't have the right compliance on the lab. The insurance threw the claim right out. So they've been paying for all the insurance, and then they couldn't use it anyway because they hadn't met all the standards that they were supposed to meet on it.
I called about 25 engineers in Oklahoma before I would find someone that was willing to work with it. And
you said the prices were all over the place too.
Yeah, it was.
Right.
So cutting out that and being able to cut out how much time I poured in just to be able to find all the engineers to get all the proper stamps. And having a shortcut with him is a huge, huge bonus.
Right. Yeah, you were saying you were paying to educate.
Yeah, because a lot of these guys have never done it before, so I'm
Right.
kind of like coaching them through and like showing them the different guidelines that we have to go through and what the codes we're trying to hold up, and I'm paying them to learn to do it. And they
This
get to
is
go
what I
on and
need.
then build it for the next guy and the next guy. But I'm always that first one that calls them and be like, "Hey, you ready to try this out?" And they're like, "I guess."
As compliant operators in the space, you two provide some insight here that a lot of the other people don't. What was the experience like in becoming compliant, and how much of that did you end up having to do the research on yourself as opposed to having someone walk you through what you needed to do to be a compliant lab?
We just had to figure it all out kind of on the fly. Like there wasn't any kind of setup thing for it, so it was just on the fly figuring out. Oh, now we need to get this part and this one. And it came a lot with when you just going to get your compliance. When you go to get your certificate of compliance, depending on what city you're in, you need to already have all of that applied in and turned in. So for us, we were fortunate we already had everything kind of ready to go. And then when we found out that the LP gas came online, all I had to do was just pull my file and send it over to Nick, and Nick signed it off once he came up and did his inspection.
And that was because you took the initiative to initially build it correctly and compliantly
Correct.
before the enforcement.
I got lucky enough to have Aaron, who's worked with C1D1 Labs as well, and that's kind of like how they got connected. Is that we were building this out and trying to get to the highest standard that we possibly could, and that's how we came across his equipment.
Gotcha. All right. So what are the options for creating a compliant space inside an existing facility that is not in compliance and going to risk losing their ability to operate? Like what would be the bare bones, most cost-effective way to do it versus the most expensive way to do it?
I think that's the best way of really looking at it is really viewing what's expensive and how to avoid some of those bigger expenses in your phase one, right? Something very often overlooked in these Class 1 Division 1 rooms is the HVAC or makeup air units. Typically, we sell these rooms with 18-inch axial fans, right? We remove the bearings from the airflow to make them compliant and explosion-proof. But you're not recirculating the air in these rooms. So if you're in a place where it can get very cold or very hot in the summer, that you're continuously heat exchanging that air from outside to inside your booth. A good phase one is obviously not buying a makeup air unit. If you can't afford one, the fans themselves stay compliant, but you're going to have very, very, very cold employees, or very hot employees, which are in very hot systems, right? Your systems are also temperature controlled, right? So all your equipment is then at risk, right? So knowing that the makeup air unit and knowing that some of these equipments that are pre-certified on the very high budget range, some of these things are luxuries, whereas a lot of the guys who have made money in market share realize that they just need to get to market, right? So a small machine, 5-10 pound machine that doesn't have all the bells and whistles, start with dry ice and a water heater rather than a $70,000, $150,000 chiller. Getting certifications done with myself who can peer review your Frankenstein machines, your put together machines that are hopefully at least ASME compliant, right? But doing that with a system that's not off the shelves that costs $150,000 or, with these Rolls-Royce HVAC systems and, just as long as you have your compliance, which is done through architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers and getting the permits done, you could get a $40,000 C1D1 and, $50,000 extractor, and the majority of your equipment costs right there for certified equipment could be underneath $100,000 if you do it right. But obviously there are equipment companies out there that like to charge a lot more than others, and they can get you into a purchasing path pretty quick. So doing your due diligence and talking to enough people and making sure that you have different options on different scales and different phases planned out for the building is probably my biggest suggestion on how to do it affordably.
Okay. Rachel, I wanted to ask you, inevitably there's going to be some legal fancy footwork around all of this. So there's a bunch of folks that just got slapped with getting shut down because they're not in compliance.
Yes.
So what are the legal ramifications for getting shut down or for continuing to operate up until the point that you become compliant? Like what does that look like?
Unfortunately, a lot of that is at the discretion of the department. Under an OMMA audit inspection, if things can be fixed, then they are willing to typically work with you to fix them. They'll give you hopefully an entire list of the things that they see wrong. What's recently passed and is now being enforced is fines, administrative penalties. Each violation is between $500 to $5,000. So one of those things of, preventing your employees from asking questions. Everybody in the whole company needs to know the compliance standards. It can't just be owners. It needs to come down. And one thing we notice is there's like a hierarchy of these people know the right thing in companies, but they're not letting everyone else know. So the inspections pull up and someone shows up on site and an employee is handling this inspection. And they don't know everything. They don't even know what's really going on based on lack of communication. So one thing that as legal counsel we've had an issue with is when does it go from an administrative penalty to criminal implications? And that's one thing that we can't really tell you. If it's egregious, if it's putting people in danger, they'll shut you down immediately. You'll have to, they'll revoke your license. You do get a hearing for that. If they give it to you, they don't have to. They can take it. They can come up and just emergency shut you guys down if you are that non-compliant. So I wish I had a better answer of, this is the thing you do, and yeah, you'll get that fine. We don't know yet. They are just now setting the precedent for what's about to happen. It's going to get worse, and they're going to start enforcing it. And a lot of these companies can't afford it. They haven't set a reserve aside for the things that they've done wrong. They haven't even set aside legal counsel fees or CPA fees or insurance fees. So, that's about it. Unfortunately,
the OMA won't be pressing charges if they show up. But if you have the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics show up, that they can press charges on site right then and there on things that they see.
Yes, both agencies have the discretion to advise law enforcement how to handle, if to handle, at their discretion. OB&DD has obviously come and shut people down. You've seen in the news, I'm sure, several times that these grows are just being torched, everything. You're being locked out, and then the entire facility and program is going to be stayed until you can either fix it or it just stays that way, because typically people aren't going to fight that legal battle.
Which is not their goal.
Which is not the goal.
Their goal is not to shut you down. Their goal is for you to stay operational and make money, and so that the city and states can also make money, right?
Right.
I wish the fire marshals were here, but the communication between companies that are getting into market and fire marshals is huge, and they appreciate it. They like being in the loop rather than showing up to a burnt down building being out the loop. Right. So being with it step by step by step, and being in communication with the fire marshal and asking them, hey, is this something that we could do, or what's your preferred method on this? What are some companies that that build C1D1s that you guys prefer? Like they want to be communicated to, and that's huge and necessary, because the fear of authority for most entrepreneurs in this industry, we've lived with them for our entire lives. So that it's different to pick up a phone and call somebody.
They want to feel like they're working with you and not against you. Yeah. Like you're not trying to hide something, and they want to feel like that camaraderie that you guys are trying to get to an end goal together.
Ultimately, your local authority who's having jurisdiction is going to be the ones who give you the thumbs up or thumbs down, and they can, determine what's more safe, and more stringent than the state. So, for example, we've seen municipalities and cities develop in other states where, initially the state code doesn't require suppression throughout the building, and certain municipalities decided, well, we don't want to take the liability of having this business inside of our city limits without having the fire suppression. So they can add different layers on top of the state codes to make it more stringent.
Exactly.
That's why it's really up to the inspectors and fire departments and engineers within those AHJs to determine.
I'm sorry, I did want to touch too that, there are a lot of license revocations now. That will have implications for the owners on the license trying to get a new license if they just wanted to tank this business because it's just so not compliant and start over. So I do want not maybe everybody here, but everybody watching, that it does matter. You can't just start over. They have seen that loophole over and over again, and they have closed it. So everyone needs to be on the license, whether you're receiving a direct or indirect interest from the company, and it needs to be disclosed. So.
And LP gas board, I think you were asking about implications. I know LP gas board, they can fine $1,000 a day for every 100-pound cylinder of LP gas unodorized that they find that's out of compliance with Class 6. And it sounds like it's very discretionary too, but I just heard that number thrown out. So it's something that they're gonna, I don't know what they would do, but that's what I've heard they might do.
Being from California myself, who did a very poor job of regulating in general, it was one of the things that was factored into business was, are we going to pay fines and just continue to operate? And that's the kind of thing where I'm wondering if that's going to happen here.
It doesn't happen here.
They'll shut it down.
It does, yeah. It's an instant. Get a cease and desist if you receive an infraction until you've corrected it.
Understood.
And come into compliance.
They're finally starting to give you written notice, which is fantastic because they weren't before. So.
They just expect you to know.
Great. So
They just expect you to know.
with any of these companies that are negatively affected by this newly enforced regulation, do they have any legal recourse based on the information they were given or what was presented to them at the time when they were getting their license to operate and then getting slapped with all of this new information that they need to follow? Do they have any legal recourse? recourse?
Well, depends who told him. I mean, if there was a lawyer that told them and there was nothing existing, then that's not a malpractice claim. The government has this thing called sovereign immunity that you can't really sue them. And if you can and you end up actually getting granted that claim, you're capped at almost no money. You're not going to recoup anything. So the short answer is no. Legislation is going to keep changing and we have to comply with it. And financially, I understand that burden, but there's very little legal recourse for you.
Understood. So what is, this is I guess to everybody here, what is the best path forward to get all of the extractors that are operating in Oklahoma doing so safely and getting them to be more compliant?
Permits. The system's set up to keep people safe. The idea of having engineers and attorneys and applicable experts sit on committees that are determining these new standards. It's ultimately to keep people safe and make sure there's no explosions. I've sold over 150 of these rooms, and we've only had one incident, and someone was using a heat gun inside of the room, which is the only time there's ever an incident was with a heat gun. But I won't drill too far into that. But if you're using these rooms correctly, I'm extremely confident you'll be safe. Right? There's no source of ignition, and you have constant airflow, and the gas isn't getting to an explosive limit. Right? So ultimately, getting a C1D1 and permitting it correctly with the correct engineers will keep you safe. I think that's...
And I think that's the basics, because it sounds like from my outside perspective that the OMMA, the LP Gas Board, and the Fire Marshal are not communicating very thoroughly, and the OBN.
There's no interagency
right.
communication.
And I can tell you next year they're all moving into the same building, apparently. So the LP Board, the OMMA, and the Fire Marshal are moving into the same building.
Now we'll know their address.
It's interesting that they pass down the liability, right, from state to city, because the city's the one that are giving you permits for this. But normally in other industries, they also have to pass down a ladder of education, right? And this industry is different because we are the ladder of education a lot of the times for the municipality, going in there and bringing in engineer reports and or other ordinances from other places and teaching the building department and fire department rather than the state doing it itself. And that's an opportunity as an entrepreneur, right? Like I said, they like that communication. So getting in front of that is, in my opinion, always advantageous rather than it being sprung upon you.
And you pointed out, go to the engineers for understand the basics, because some of these guys don't even understand what it is that they're supposed to be signing off on with the plans.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this because I own an engineering
It's a
company.
nightmare, yeah.
And to use my company, but if you're not using a company like mine, make sure you're using engineers that have actually done this before. Not just saying, oh, I've built other grows before. No, how many labs have you built?
Yeah.
Not just how many grows have you designed. That's the most important thing. Otherwise, paying an attorney to write a contract from scratch or paying an engineer that's never done this before, you're going to pay the majority of your bills and going in circles.
Yeah.
David, I wanted to throw one down to you as an operator or a consulting firm that works in ethanol as well as hydrocarbons. What's the difference that you've seen for building facilities utilizing ethanol as opposed to LPGs, and the difference in the stringency of the policy enforcement?
I mean, certainly with hydrocarbon facilities, the regulations are much tighter on the hydrocarbon facilities required with this Class 1 Division 1 rooms. I've worked with a lot more of ethanol production facilities, which is C1, Class 1 Division 2 rooms, and a lot more leniency. And just with the limits you can store and how you store them and whatnot. So I found, and that's kind of where I specialize in, is the bulk ethanol manufacturing. So I see the hydrocarbon guys having a lot more harder time by the enforcing agencies than the ethanol manufacturers.
Because technically a paint booth could classify you to have your C1D2.
I'd like to differ.
Well, I mean, a modded paint booth. Sorry.
Yeah. So the idea of these interlocks and so forth on the gas sensors are all, like I said, they're new codes. So NFPA 33 is the spray book, right? And that's where you can find your fume height requirements and so forth. But I strongly suggest anyone that ever wants to build their own system that's the first place to look is the NFPA 1, Chapter 38, because they're defining extraction rooms per extraction, and they're having new NEC codes that are reflecting that. So not always, but yes, it'll get you close.
Close, yeah. But just that it's a little bit less strict on that. They're not as strict on it.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
The difference between
night and
C1,
day.
D1 and
Night and
C1,
day,
D2.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The only thing that's really concerning to them is the suppression.
Yeah.
A lot of people are just piping down from their main water pipes into these ethanol rooms, and they don't realize that the fire spreads before it gets diluted. So if you don't yet know this, you have to have big enough pipes that throw enough water into your ethanol, because if it spreads before it dilutes, then you've got a bigger problem than you started with, right? I suggest dry chem on the ethanol rooms.
And let's talk about theirs, because it came down to CFM for you guys, right? And you were on a well. You're not on city water.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
we can't have a water sprinkler system in ours because of that.
And there's a lot of wells in Oklahoma versus city water connections, and so if the well isn't pumping at a high enough CFM
So
to
dry
be
chem's the
able
answer.
to put that ethanol fire potentially out fast enough, then you go dry chem.
I'd go dry chem either way. It's less safer.
Got it.
Not as easy to clean, but definitely.
No.
Yep.
Moving forward, I would like to take some audience questions. We'll just go ahead and repeat the questions so that the mic can hear it. So, are there any audience questions for any of our panelists? Yes, what is it?
So, in an unincorporated area, this is a question. So, I'm in Logan County,
Okay.
and initially upon build out, there was a lot of, I guess, misunderstanding at the municipality level. And they basically said, do what you want, like, we really only care about the tax assessor coming by to determine your value. And so I've heard from a lot of people building now that they're being held up by the municipality just reminding them, hey, the state fire marshal has final say in your building sign-off, I guess.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, as a business that's been operating for over a year, who did not go through the state fire marshal, what should I approach them and say, hey, you missed one, or are they going to come and shut me down and say, you should have done it right the first time, take everything out and put it back in?
You're not going to like this answer, but I
Yeah.
have to see the communication between you guys to actually give you an answer. If they actually gave you like formal declarations, then obviously we can go off of that and try to maneuver a little bit better. The COC is obviously required every year. If nothing's changed with your structure or ownership or anything like that, you can just file an attestation. But if your fire marshal doesn't sign off, then your building code isn't right.
Well,
Your state building code.
The
And
correct
unincorporated,
answer is they can, right?
unincorporated or not, you still have to abide by state building codes.
Should I approach them though? Because from my perspective,
Yes.
it seems like they're never going to get out there.
I would still approach them in good faith.
Okay.
Fire codes are not grandfathered, right? So you cannot, once they update fire codes, maintain the last one with your permits. It's very much a safety issue. So if you're out of compliance, you can be shut down, I think is a very good way of looking at it. And the quicker you get up to compliance, the faster you don't have to worry about it. So I would initially, I'd probably go first to my engineers and then start developing a plan before I let the city know, or county know maybe.
Yeah, fix it maybe. Yeah,
But taking the steps forward is the solution.
yeah.
So it's
I wouldn't let it go
compliant facility,
unresolved.
but okay, fair enough.
I
need
understand.
to approach them.
You and a lot of people call our office with the same issue of, we didn't have these regulations before. Whether that's on the municipality level or the state level or all these agencies or whatever it is. And because it is public policy right now, because of safety, there's not really an argument to be had about it because public policy trumps everything. So, a lot of signatures. Typically, when you're unincorporated, the county just issues it to you. They don't have all the inspectors come out. So it's kind of your responsibility to make sure all that's done because there's no inspector to ensure it.
They sent me the link, and it's published on the state fire marshal's website. It's a spreadsheet that shows every county. And are you guys up on this?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in on it.
Oh, okay.
Is there a way to expedite having the state fire marshal like return your phone call?
Yeah.
Hire a lawyer to send them a demand letter.
What if you've already done that and you're still waiting?
Call the
Have your lawyer call again and again and again until
That's the main
that's
problem,
what we
I think,
do.
for most of us here, right? Is that we've been
Fire marshals like fire protection engineers too.
And just remember too that they're state workers, they're flooded.
So it does fall under state fire marshal jurisdiction rather, and I've been reaching out and we have sent letters and we've done all of that and we're like shut down and just.
Yeah, then maybe you do.
That's the main problem.
Everybody's doing the same thing.
Right. Well, you can then you should talk to your lawyer about it. This is not my official legal advice. I'm not your counsel.
It's something we see. It's something we see in every single state and every single city as the industry grows. The workers are overworked.
Yes.
Right, and they don't have enough workers, right?
I'm sorry.
I said there's the whole thing about the shortage of canvassing for all of us. There's so many operators and processors and growers, and
Right.
we're at the leniency of availability is the problem. And
We
it just
are.
stinks when we're, like you said, entrepreneurs putting time and money and waiting and doing the right thing.
Yeah.
We have our C1 deal and we have everything.
And I realize how many millions of dollars you guys potentially miss out on because of the interim period until that's approved. There's not much more we can do other than harass them legally and ethically, because you still need them on your team too. You don't really want to piss everybody off, right? So you can't really get up in their ass, until you need them. So it's kind of that fine line of how do you want to argue it, and your situation's different than everybody else's. So.
Can I go a little bit further on this? Would any legal counsel potentially say, you are compliant, you're up to code?
Yes.
I mean, I'm more than confident that we are up to code.
There are
Could
probably
just
thousands
operate-
of lawyers that will tell you that.
Until the state fire marshal.
We can't get gas, even if we get them letters sent to them, we're still at the liability of the LP board in agreements with the state fire marshal saying that we are able to get our gas. We just can't.
And they're coming after us. So they're requiring the distributor's required to put an end user list together under whatever class permit we hold, right? So there's the class 1, there's the class 3, there's the class 10 for the manager, and then the end user list is a document that we have to share with them and say, hey, here's the operator that we're dropping off to, and then they verify it, and they're. The good news is that they wanted, they're trying to help. They want to help, but I've heard that from.
Today would have been informative for them.
So instead of an attorney as well, you can use engineers to do the same thing, right? So we've created what we call a fire hazard analysis report, which we've done over 100 facilities where we lay out the control areas, the certifications on the equipment, the MAQs, fire suppression requirements, transfilling SOPs, your process flow diagram for your complete extraction and post-processing, which is then stamped by a PE fire protection engineer, right? And by doing that, you show all the Class 6 compliance in one report that's stamped by a state-approved fire protection engineer. And it does two different
Can't
things.
ask for more.
As an attorney, you want all the weapons as possible, and that's really it.
What else do you need?
Right? But it also shifts liability away from the fire department for these things. So it's easier to give a quicker approval if they have those tools.
And the confidence. It instills confidence in
I
them.
think the issue is
They also-
communication.
Unfortunately.
They also have to do
Because
on-site
we've handed them
inspections.
that packet, and we've done everything, and we've been waiting, and it's been like months.
Yeah.
The
They're
problem is,
inundated.
there's too much.
Yeah.
And I get that. That's not the problem here. The problem is that we're all compliant, and we're all ready to go, and we're all ready to work, and we're all ready to make money, and we can't.
Well,
Yeah.
does anybody from any other state down there at the end, what was Adelanto, California Adelanto?
Washington too.
Yeah.
It's
Just a
the
bottleneck.
same problem everywhere.
Yeah. MMA came online. Like, we've had the problem in multiple states. It's just
They need to pay
here,
inspectors.
there's way too many of us.
Yeah.
Can you request more workers legally? Is that like a thing?
I mean, they should have the funding from the state allocated to them to
Well, it's just
provide for
too
more
many
workers.
of us that are in unincorporated counties.
Right, there's like what, 5 people in their office right now?
And there's
Yeah.
very
It's not an excuse, it's just an answer,
No,
you
no,
know?
no, I'm not.
I feel for you.
Like, you're-
And it pisses us off too because like our job is to provide answers for clients who have problems, right? And
very hard
I
question.
have that answer for you, and I can't get a hold of them. And do I have to file an injunction, to force you to answer me? Like, we don't want to do that. We still need a permit. Like, it's just
they're
you're
a
right
lot
in that
less.
line.
They're a lot less like an answer.
Exactly. Now you're really gonna have problems.
There's
Now-
22 Class 6 operators in Oklahoma right now.
Out of what,
22. 22 as of Thursday.
Keep in mind, a lot of processors licensed in Oklahoma really only do like infused pre-rolls and stuff. They're not extraction.
And I will say this: one huge thing to consider is coming to these fire marshals and building departments with everything ready, with a pretty bow tie on it. What's making their bandwidth stretch is just when we pick up the phone and call them and ask them every single question every single day, right?
Oh no, I got a HAL certified booth. I have a stamped ASME certified Iron Fist. Like I work for Iron Fist.
Should we use the
Like,
C1D1 Labs booth?
That's my problem. I got a booth. I'll buy a booth.
Yeah. Monopoly.
Trying to figure out the right, steps to move.
There's no easy answer to get the fire marshals to move, right? And none of us can actually make them move, and sending lawyer letters is not a good
Futile.
way. It's not a good way to make anybody move, right?
It's like a last-ditch option.
Fire marshal trying to work with him to let him know, hey, I'm not here to blow anything up.
Yeah, exactly. Showing up. That's always what I did
Physical
back in the day when I had my labs. I showed up.
State fire marshal office,
To the office as many days as I could.
So you're gonna talk to a
Right.
receptionist.
You got a question?
I think in that regard, one of the things I picked up with years of
Guys, I'm gonna hold down the side ground.
one of the things I picked up lobbying, I mean, it's crude, but you do catch far more bees with honey than you do with shit.
Yeah.
And one of the things you can do to ingratiate yourself to inspectors is to just hold like appreciation events. So O&G guys know this really well, and they host barbecues, and all the fire marshals come. And these guys can't smoke weed.
Yeah.
He's like, would they show up?
So I mean,
It can't be a weed event for these guys to come to.
Yeah.
It cannot. It can be a family barbecue. Right? An education type of. They don't even know. They don't want an education. They're coming to relax for a minute, catch some barbecue. They want to be cool, and you're a priority over there.
somebody above, so fire marshal and LP board
Take
were
them to Top
down.
Golf.
They were down to sit up here and
Yeah.
talk,
But
and
they
and
put
then
themselves in a questionable place.
somebody above them made a
But if
judgment
your
call.
lab is inviting the local fire department and the local plumbers guild and the electrician in town to come have a barbecue on 4th of July, everybody likes you. Right? So now they're paying attention to your stack in the paperwork.
You have
Rubbing
experience?
elbows.
Yeah. You have experience with this?
We're still in Oklahoma.
Say she lobbied before, so.
Yeah.
It's a game.
And
When you have a stack of 500 papers, one can get lost,
Right?
yeah.
And it
If
is
you've already
political.
got everything on deck, then they just need to know who you are in the title. Because everybody else thinks they already have everything on deck too. And so now they're just filtering through 7,000 guys, and maybe 6,000 of them don't have a third of them deck, So you're doing everything right, but they don't know who you are. Make an impression.
He's like, here it is, read it.
What is the negative repercussion of continuing to operate without going through what Jay was going through?
Cease and desist.
Yeah, they can.
Liability.
You will have a revocation hearing, if not immediate, based on your standards. They can suspend your license. They can prevent you from getting another license. They can administer $1 million in administrative penalties for every time you've done this, for every time they come out. So it's
Not worth the risk.
no. No. Because I would not want to go to jail over it. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had a question about teaching my employees about the compliance in case an inspection comes up. I am the only operator, and we are having fire marshal pushback, so I haven't done a run since August. But hopefully once we get the fire marshal to approve us and we get everything going, we'll start running again. And I am now terrified that if I'm not there, someone's going to talk to one of the teenagers that works there.
As you should be.
Shut down. So how would you advise me as the only operator to make sure that everyone else is there? Doesn't ruin it for me.
Yeah. kind of self-promote here. I mean, I brought on Heather Strickler, who's actually here today, who does stuff like this, and there is a lot of compliance firms that do this, where they can come on site and teach them, educate them. If they come, either you don't talk, you call me, whatever it is, but you should get a heads up. If you don't, though, and they just show up, you know that this is what you say, this is what you show them, do not let them hear, this is how you access things.
The joke about the binder with the bow on it, should I just have like a...
Not a joke.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, I just worded it.
Yeah.
The advice,
Yeah.
should I just have a binder that's like my compliance login and just have everyone know?
Well, yeah, so like when you have
All
your
like-
safety
yeah.
data sheets and things like these,
Yes, sir.
the best way to educate anybody is a PDF, right?
If they read it, though, because you said they're teenagers.
So here's, I kind of misread that, but I work at a pretty large cultivation and most of the kids that work there are under the age of 20 and they
Yeah.
don't really care. So how
And they're
do
not,
I...
you can't make them care, but you can scare
I
them.
just want to make sure that I've enabled them to, not screw up when I'm there.
So there's
QR codes, they will your entire compliance package on a PDF that you can
there's an 11-page PDF online for the processor compliance.
Okay.
It's a checklist that they go through if they were to come and inspect your place. You can find that online.
Okay.
And we're actually got one scheduled up for next week on Wednesday, and we go through the entire checklist to make sure every single thing is checked off.
Yeah.
So that's the best way. If you want to just do an in-house check, have your guys up to speed, you can print it out and have it there for them to see every single regulation that needs to be met.
And I can find that on OMA's website?
Yeah, OMMA's website. It's under the business forms.
I could,
And they also have the rebuttal. It's 22 pages long. It shows you how to fix each situation.
yeah, I could help you with that. So as a DOT employer, right, I've got trucks over the road that are carrying hazardous products. When you have an inspection on a truck, your driver, and one of them's here, a very talented, guy at the company. He's got a binder at his knee in the door of that truck, and that truck has every single document that every single federal, state, whatever requirement, hazardous pipeline hazardous material safety agency. I mean, you name it. And not only is they're checking all four corners of that truck, lights, and our safety director's here. He's outside. Things look safe.
Keeping perimeter.
Once we get approved, that on my end, that's the primary.
Well, and I think coming prepared. I think being prepared, looking good, and that you have it together and everything crossed T's, dots.
And you said you're a big cultivation, so I don't want to talk over you, but an employee handbook needs to be in place for everybody, and employee contracts that lets them sign off that they know what they're getting into and that they've read this thing that goes in their personnel file and that they know what they can say and don't say and all the, and NDAs are here and there, so
Background
make sure your
checks.
attorney crafts them appropriately. But the confidentiality agreement should stick. Solicitation's hard. I would put that in there that if an employee left, that they can't take other employees with them, or solicit them for their new company or anything like that.
That works.
Yeah,
My
that
lawyer
works.
just told me I have to follow
But
that rule.
non-competes are hard. They have to be really narrowly tailored. But if they suck as an employee, you don't care if they work for somebody else.
Background checks as well. Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics requires you to have background checks on every employee.
And incentivize learning. If you want them to understand something about a project, give them a reward for putting in the effort for you. It is a part of your job, but you're working with children, whether we're 40 or 20. We all like a gold star on our paper. It'll help.
Did you hear that?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much.
Gold stars too. Yeah.
Gold stars, incentivized learning.
I got it.
And ribbons.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
Obviously, it's definitely a younger market here as far as legal, right? And we're all learning different entrepreneurial skills very fast, right? I think one of the things that's looked over is making sure you have your agreements in place before you start working for somebody, right? And understanding that probably your non-compete won't stick. Yeah.
That's why we have arbitration clauses.
Home's great, I love it.
Lex, thank you for putting all this
Yo,
together.
thank you.
Thank all of you for
We
coming.
do this for you guys. Thank you all for coming.